Ladies, gentlemen, no variations thereupon. Today we're going to be making some medieval underwear of the future. I love being able to do that. So here's the thing with medieval underwear. It's made of linen and it's very plain. So throughout most of history, a lot of people would have only worn one set of clothes and had underwear that they wore basically all year round, occasionally washing it while they put on their Sunday best to go to church. So it was something that was fairly comfortable, slightly loose fitting, not entirely loose because you had to have it underneath your clothes, but it works well as a day garment, as underwear, and as a night garment, which is what I'm intending to use it for. Now, in a lot of human history, cotton, at least in Northern Europe where I'm from, was the more expensive material. So linen was the go-to choice, and linen is very breathable, very thermally regulating, which is the primary quality that I'm looking for. So if I can get something that's comfy, fairly soft and breathable, allows me to stay cool, then that makes perfect pyjamas, which is what I'm intending to use this medieval underwear for. Before I go into making it of the future, we're going to need to actually just make the medieval underwear. So I'm going to follow largely a guide that Morgan Donna has put out on her channel. So let's just jump in and start our sewing. As with any sewing project, after the obligatory lie down, you have to mark out using tailor's chalk exactly where you're going to cut and then cut out the fabric. Now I've deliberately not gone into the measurements and how to draft this because I'm using a design that Morgan Donna has put out, and I want you to go watch her video if you want to know exactly how to do it. But basically what I've done is follow her design, only rather than cutting out a separate front and back piece, I've done it as one long section. In between the two sleeves that you'll see positioned at the sides there, sitting out like a T, is going to be where the head hole would be. So that's the back right at the top and the front down at the bottom. The four triangles at the side are actually cut from two rectangles that have just been cut diagonally across, and they're the same length as the one half of the body, so from under the armpit down to the bottom of where I want the dress to go. And they're there just to add some extra volume and bulk around the body and hips. Now if you're like me, you've always struggled to do sleeves, but this is an actual easy way to do it. What I've done here is I've cut out a rectangle of material. The widest point is the widest point of my arm, and as the widest point of my arm is not my wrist, what I've done is cut two little triangles from the front corners here and here, and because the sleeve's actually going to come off the shoulder, where we're going to attach the other two triangles is actually going to be around the bicep, which is going to be the actual widest part of the arm, just to give that little bit extra space, and the narrower point down the end is going to be where the wrist is. Now before we go any further, I should just say a word about the materials themselves. You see, most material that you ever sew with will have a direction to the threads, by which I mean they normally run at right angles to each other. What that means is if you put in the direction of the threads, then as my lovely assistant is showing here, you get very little stretch in material. But if you put it at a right angle to that, then you end up with a lot of stretch in the material. Largely because of the way I've cut these, we're going to have the threads running up and down the length of the garment. But where we've cut the triangular pieces out, necessarily one of the sides is going to be cut through and across the threads, which means it's going to be more prone to stretching. So if I were to sew these pieces together with the diagonals together, then what could happen is that we'll end up with some weird stretching along that seam. The way to counter this is to flip one of the triangles so that a straight edge is sewn to a diagonal edge, and that way the two properties sort of cancel out each other and you'll end up with a more stable seam going along that side. It also has the added benefit of the bottom of the hem following a better sort of curve, so it looks better as a finished product. So now with all that said, let's get to actually sewing the garment together. To begin with, we're just going to do a simple straight stitch and attach the triangles that we cut out of the big rectangles to the side of the garment. And now we're ready to try the fit, but before we do that we've got to mark on a head hole. So first we need to find the centre of the garment. We do that by folding it in half, and then once everything's lined up we draw on the space for the head hole as wide as our head. We don't want to go any wider because it's easy to cut more material out but harder to put things back on. So now we're ready to try the fit, so we pass the garment over our head through the hole we've just made, and I'm going to check first that the triangles come up to my underarms, so the sleeve will be in the right place, and then I'm going to place the sleeve itself over the top of my shoulder to make sure everything lines up correctly and the sleeve is the correct length. Now that I'm confident everything's going to fit, I'm just going to sew all the seams together with a simple straight stitch. Now as we come to the point of pressing seams, it's time for the ironing montage. Thus concludes the ironing montage. Now for my favourite part of any sewing project, the hand sewing. You can do a machine stitch around virtually everything, but for things that show on the outside it's probably best that you use a hand stitch as it's less visible. Now what you'll notice here, my top tip for you if you're doing any hand sewing, is to draw a series of dots along your finger so that you can use them as guides for evenly spacing out your stitching. And that's going to be the medieval garment, but I did say we were going to make this of the future. Because my bedroom, you see, has a sort of sci-fi theme to it, so I can't just rock up in some medieval pyjamas. I'm going to bring it into the 24th century. That's right, friends of DeSoto, I said 24th century. So let's get Federation. Now having put the medieval underwear on, I'm going to mark on the neckline that I want, and I'm going to follow roughly the shape of the Deep Space Nine uniforms. And I'm going to use a yellow cotton tape just to create a pop of colour and to designate myself as part of the engineering corps. And this yellow tape is going to be top stitched in place using 2 rows of stitching, one for the top and one for the bottom. And now for the final touch we need the com badge, and I'm just going to embroider this on with a metallic thread. In order to create a bit of interest and dimensionality to the embroidery, I'm going to use up and down threads on the left hand side of the embroidery and a side to side stitching on the right hand side of the embroidery. All that's left to do now is to hem up the collar and we're done. And there we have it, medieval underwear for the 24th century. Didn't say of the future that time. Future. It's getting annoying. Overall, this is a great build. Nice and easy, and this is a much better way of doing the sleeves that rather than trying to ease them in, having that just fold over. It makes it a lot easier to get in place and get right. Left the sleeves go rather long because it's nice and cosy, but what I'm thinking is I might cut a little hole at the side there so I can stick my thumb through. But that's a job for the future. At the moment now, this is good enough to wear to sleep in. I may need to change the thread on there because this is a bit stiff compared to what I normally use for embroidery, so it's might be a little bit rough to sleep on. And I also need to finish a lot of the seams on the inside. I've done 2 of the seams along the side. I haven't done the inside of the sleeves yet, I've just done the hems, and the reason is that it takes a while and I've got to get this video edited and put online, so I'm going to be doing that after I've finished editing the video. But it's good enough to wear and sleep in, and I'll just leave you with the shots of the finished product.